We are live, guys. And by the way, Ronik, it's whatever number it shows, it's way more. It's just what it shows here because it's not combining all the three platforms. But
Okay.
this is why I like this thing. Look, guys, we are live. Clinical research is booming. I put the ticker underneath. We look like we're CNBC. Don't get me started because we'll start putting stock prices on there. Or with Ronik's expertise, we can start putting market valuations for sites on the
There you
bottom.
go.
What are they up? What's a site compared to a soybean future? What's the ratio? So how's it going, Ronik? We just had an interesting conversation about tech. Ronik comes from hospitality background, but also highly integrated with tech. Has been working in clinical research on a number of things. I don't know which ones you want to mention, but feel free to introduce yourself, Ronik.
Sure. Well, I'm Ronik. Thanks for having me on. So I'm working on a number of things. One we talked about is the clinical research site venture. We're looking to acquire some sites and build our own site network, take it public. We also do patient recruitment for clinical research and clinical trials, and also working on some tech stuff in the clinical space, more for on the recruitment side.
If you look, Guru Nation, this is for you site owners. This is for you people trying to get a job in this space. For you people, especially for you people already in this space. If you start looking at the sponsors, like the innovative sponsors, like Moderna as an example, they're a tech company. Like they are tech. And we talked about the convergence. In the last decade, we saw the convergence of media and tech, obviously with social media, right? Those two things converged. They're one now. It's hard to separate. The same thing's happening with financial services and tech.
Sure.
Those two things, they're becoming like the same thing. It's hard to separate those things.
Yeah.
I think health
tech
is
is leading
next.
the world, right? That's every industry, even something as slow as a clinical research. I just say that tongue in cheek, but clinical research is awesome. But yeah, I mean, everything is a tech business or wants to be a tech business, or if they're not already.
Everything I think will become a tech. It's gonna merge. They're gonna converge. So the thing is, if you're a site owner or if you're someone working in the space, you got to start getting familiar with these things. Like automation is key, and we're gonna be talking to Ronik later about the products he has. And by the way, if you guys follow me, look, let's stop everything first. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment, and share. If you don't know what to comment, put a robot emoji because we're shattering the algorithms with the robots. So it's all about automation. So put a robot emoji. You've got to understand how to automate your processes if you're a site. Sponsors and CROs are already learning. Sites is next. You have to. And if you're someone working in the space, you got to figure out where you fit in the midst of all this stuff. Let's go through some of these. Latrice, what up, Latrice? I'm new to your channel, transferring from admin work to clinical research. I found your content very helpful for my career change. Thank you so much, Latrice. Latrice knows what's up. She's putting a robot emoji. Why? Because we're shattering the algorithms, guys. Thank you very much, Latrice. Latrice, make sure that you start learning about tech, how these things are converging. Rod Raphael says it's already happening. Right? It's already happening. What do you think about this, Ronik? It's already happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you look at this industry, 10 or even 5 years ago, I think there was a survey done where majority of the sites were still using paper. Small amount, a very small amount was actually using a CTMS. And now we're seeing that the adoption is increasing on all levels for CTMS, for eSource, eReg, anything E basically. It's increasing. Sometimes that's being pushed by the sponsors or or the CROs. I think it's a good thing, provided that it's done in the right way.
So we were talking on our Zoom about the philosophical aspects of why sites don't necessarily like to invest in tech. And I think there's several things going on there. I think the biggest one is they're jaded from all the solutions that they've encountered in the past, many of which, Ronak, were forced down their throats by the sponsors. All right. And ends up just giving them more work and not really any ROI. So now, and there's another point here too. Sites, in a way, have become entitled. Like, they expect sponsors to pay for everything. That's another thing. And the third thing is just they're busy. Like, they're busy, man. First of all, it's very big. Like, we're in a very busy phase right now. On top of that, life happens all the time.
Sure.
So when life happens, everything takes a back seat. That's happening all the time to somebody out there. One of the sites, a couple of the sites. And finally, I think there's an element of them not wanting to take on more responsibility, even if there's hope that it's going to work.
Sure.
So that's why I think it's hard for vendors to gain traction in the space. What have been your experiences as a vendor trying to gain traction? Because your products actually work, but what's been the feedback from the sites?
I mean, we're still very early in the process, the kind of things that I've heard and the kind of feedback that I've gotten is more the reluctance to spend the money. Is it worth it? Is it am I going to get an ROI on it? And some of the other things that you've mentioned, right? Like change is hard for any organization, but especially with clinical research, there's so many moving parts. You've got the sponsor, you've got the CRO, you've got the patient, and then every aspect can have its own tech component. And so, like you said, employees get tired of the constant change and the constant new things that they have to learn, in addition to keeping up with just, the clinical aspect of it. That's probably the biggest challenge. Even if you're giving something away for free, in today's age, it's about, but my time is worth money. My mind space is worth money, right? So that's the biggest challenge. And I think it always has to be looked at from the perspective of ROI, right? So a tool might cost a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 a month, but when all is said and done and when it's deployed, the idea is that it should save money, it should save time, it should, whatever the benefit is, that should, assuming that benefit does come true, that should be the gauge of any potential investment, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in tech or anything else. And especially with research, I think it's the value per patient, it's just compared to other industries, it's just so high that it really doesn't take a lot to actually move the needle and kind of see a return.
So that brings up the continuation of the philosophical dialogue. Who should pay for this improvement, whether it's an increase in screenings, an increase in retention? Should it be the sites, or should it be the sponsors, or should it be the CROs? Or, like, in your opinion, you're an outsider.
Yeah. As
a vendor, you're a stakeholder, but you're an outsider from those three key stakeholders. Mm-hmm. Who do you think should pay for this?
Well, I mean, ideally it's the sponsor, right? Ideally, it's the sponsor or the CRO. That's what everyone wants to see, and the ROI is there. But I can tell you from, if I were a site owner and if I'm making, 5 figures on a study, and if I have the potential to increase recruitment, I'd gladly pay for that out of pocket as a site or as a network because the ROI is there. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to do with our clinical, with our site venture is that there's so many tools and resources out there that the numbers allow you to kind of experiment and try different things. And, even if 9 out of 10 don't work, the one that does work is going to be a disproportionate return on investment because I think the industry is a little bit spoiled in that, there are very few places where a visit is worth, 4 figures, 5 figures. I was talking to another colleague actually just recently, and he had an offer that to me sounded amazing. The offer was basically, we'll recruit your patients for you, and you pay us after the randomization. And I think it was the charges. It started at $1,000, and he was telling me how a lot of sites, most sites were resistant even to that, to a risk-free proposal. And I was kind of puzzled by that because I would take that deal all day long. There's no risk, and you have the potential to add on revenue.
Right.
That to me is a win-win.
But why? Why though? Why? Like what? Let's figure out why that's happening.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think part of it is just that maybe it could be that that they're so used to having the sponsors pay for everything that even having a minor expense in the grand scheme of things is something that's seen as a cost versus looking at the benefit. But I don't know. I think the way I look at it is if you had a vending machine and you can put in quarters and you get back dollars, how many quarters would you put in, right? You would keep on doing it until the vending machine stocks out.
Exactly. Even if you have to hire someone to collect the dollars.
Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
are coming out, right?
You look at the stock market. What is the ROI in a typical year in the stock market is maybe 9% a year, versus you say you put in $1,000 and you get back 10,000. 10 to 1 ROI in whatever month, 2 months. That's a 4-figure percentage in the thousands ROI. And if it's risk free, I don't know how much better you can make that deal. But he had to stop offering that because just the people were not taking him up on it.
I think there's a steep learning curve, or a I don't know if it's a learning curve, but I think it is a little bit of a learning curve because when sites onboard a new vendor,
sure,
it requires some time, and that is the uncertainty, right? Why am I going to invest time, which I know it's a certain I'm going to lose this time, and it's not certain whether I'm going to get ROI on the time.
Sure.
Just forget the money itself, just the time,
Sure.
and then the time to actually do that. Like that's assuming there is free time. A lot of these coordinators worked to the eyeball.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is interesting. This is why I wanted to go live with you, because our Zoom conversation was so good. I was like, look, we got to have Guru Nation chime in on this.
Yeah, I think, and Karen just made a really good point that,
let's put it up here. So Karen says, this is for the people listening, I'm not opposed to spending money and setting up my site for success early, but I wish there were more scalable options for startups. Is there a huge risk for a vendor to offer discounted prices for 2 to 3 months? This is what I suggested, Ronik. Given the pace of study startup.
I think that's a very fair assertion. And, we're not planning on doing long-term contracts with the stuff that we have. But it seems like that's very common in the industry. My philosophy is that if it works, it's going to pay for itself, and sites will stick with it. I mean I think that's one of the downsides is that if a vendor's asking for a 12-month commitment or a multi-year commitment, it's very difficult as a startup to be able to do that. So I agree with that point.
Absolutely. As somebody who's running a startup now myself, I can tell you that that analogy you gave me of you put a quarter in, you get a dollar out. I mean, that's who would say no to that? But
Mhm.
there's so many moving parts with my startup outside of recruiting patients.
Sure.
And I know what I'm doing. There's people who jump in that don't know what they're doing, like, or less of what they're doing than I do. Their recruitment is just one aspect, retention is one aspect. They're looking at, will my PI continue to be my PI in 6 months?
Sure. Sure.
Will I be able to get the sub-Is that I need to get this study? Will I be able to make the protocol work? You're dealing with all the startup problems.
Yeah, there's a lot of spinning plates, and you can't let any of them go. You know, whether it's looking for new studies, whether it's doing the trials themselves, the recruitment, and all the paperwork that's involved. It's really mind-boggling. So I don't blame site owners. It's very overwhelming.
But for a vendor, but that's for the startup sites. There, you reach a point, I think, after that 1 year period, where a lot of the uncertainty from a startup is gone, and
Sure.
really after the 2 year period also. But then you start you start dealing with other problems like scaling issues. So you start dealing with, okay, I'm good with like my current staff at doing 7 studies a year, maybe 8, but now I want to do 12. I want to do 12. Should I hire someone else to be able to do 12, or should I just stick to where I'm at and just be pickier on the 8 that I can take on?
Yeah, that's
those are
an important
issues,
question. Yeah.
So it's not so simple, you know, and I think all these different scenarios makes it difficult for vendors to be able to penetrate the market.
Sure.
I mean, the closest we have, and they're not even freemium, right? With what Viva is going to be doing with Site Vault, I think it's called, for their e-regulatory, and who knows if they're going to start doing e-source. I think ultimately the way the vendors see this is you need the sites to be on board with you, but the money's going to come from the sponsors. And I think they assume, at least the vendors, that the sponsors are responsible for paying for this.
Yeah, it's a unique industry because the payment is one aspect, but you also have, you know, some sponsors want to know exactly what's going on, and they might want to have approval authority on anything that's added to any trial, whether it's a third party. You know, if there's a recruiting company doing text messages, a lot of sponsors want to know, you know, who's doing that, how they're doing it, whether they're doing it compliantly, etc. So it's maybe our IRBs are also wanting to get involved, and they want to see exactly, you know, if you're sending text, what exactly are you sending? What is the content of the messages? And so there's no easy answer. There's just so many moving parts, but I think it would be beneficial to at least kind of consider that, hey, if there's a potential for a big ROI, that's what's going to drive the revenue and profitability of the site from a business standpoint, and ultimately help more people, reach more subjects, and bring clinical research forward. You know, with the volumes that are going to be increasing over the next years and decades.
Yeah, it's good point with the IRBs. You know, it's complicated enough even when you leave the IRBs out of it.
Yes.
But when you throw them in, first of all, on a macro scale, the IRBs don't want to do much because they don't have answers, right? They just want to do the bare minimum. But they are very technology averse. Like their entire business model, it's kind of like an attorney. Their default is no.
Yeah.
Can you do it? No. I remember when I wanted to do Facebook ads back in 2010, 2011, when Facebook first released that. IRB said no. All of them said no. Why? Because it's social and patients can comment, and then you lose the fixed IRB approval. That was their excuse, their lame-o excuse back then. Now they can't say no anymore, so they say yes. But they're initially very tech averse. So when it comes to something like text messaging, especially when you throw in HIPAA and things like that into the mix, with even when it comes to retention, like these are already patients in your database, which opens up another can of worms, because if a patient is in your site database, and I know you're not a HIPAA expert, and neither am I, but let's take recruiting out of it.
Sure.
Let's say this already your patient in your study. I am a coordinator. I'm texting the patient from my phone. Hey, just reminding you, tomorrow's your appointment. Technically, that's a HIPAA violation. I mean, if you ask an attorney, they're gonna say, "Ooh, be very careful with that." You know,
yeah,
that's
a good point. That's a good point, because you know, you using personal cell phones, that data is not protected. It's not encrypted. And you don't know where that cell phone is going. The other thing is, you know, do coordinators want their personal numbers out there? You know, I know a lot of coordinators are, they care so much about the patient, and they want to make sure everything is you know, kind of up and running, but you know, you're exposing personal information. So it kind of goes both ways. And that's where some of the tech can come in and sort of step in. And provide that HIPAA protection, provide that extra layer. You know, to your point, you mentioned texting for compliance and things like that. You know, one of the systems that we're working on, it actually does that automatically, and in a HIPAA compliant way, where let's say a patient is in a study. Once they're enrolled in the study, the system can actually send out the reminders according to the protocol to take the medication. And if there's any, you know, potential violation, or if there's any potential, you know, if they're about to miss their dose, or if they're having issues with the IP, they can text the coordinator back, and they would see that message. And this way, you know, it would prevent violations before they occur. The other thing is, if it's automated, now a coordinator can handle, you know, so many more patients, versus, you know, taking their phones and trying to do it manually. They're doing enough already with all the work that they have. So to try to do that proactively, it's very difficult. But it's the ROI is definitely there, and you know, if it could save some of that drop off that occurs naturally in a lot of trials, that's kind of the aim that we're aiming for.
Yes, I think you bring up another good point as far as, and I think we kind of came to this conclusion on our Zoom call. If you can, because sites feel like they're handcuffed. Like I can't wait till I start vlogging like day to day with my site. Like, hey, this is how I remind my patients. Yeah. I mean, it's gonna be, unless I'm using an automated system like yours or Krios, it's gonna be me texting them on my phone. Like,
yeah.
You know, but now that I know I have alternatives, all right, it makes sense, because I feel like my hands are not handcuffed anymore, because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to do, what I am allowed to do. So not only does your tech help me get more patients and be more efficient, but it removes some of the liability from my operations, which I think is worth something.
Sure, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of systems out there that, you know, that have messaging. It's not uncommon, but the question always is it truly HIPAA compliant? Is the, you know, a lot of systems might claim it is, but to be truly HIPAA compliant is a big investment.
Yeah.
And many of them either claim that they don't need to, or they're exempt, comparing themselves to like a mail service or parcel service, which unfortunately that's not true. If that were true, it would be a lot easier, but because it's sent, you know, through text, that information is stored somewhere, and then that comes with you know, certain HIPAA obligations, which you know, which are very expensive to implement. But That's one thing that we have focused on.
This stuff, maybe the title of this video should have been exposing all the gray areas in research, because all the stuff look, all the stuff, you come from hospitality, okay?
Mhm.
You know, social media is very important for customer acquisition and retention. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. In research, we know the same thing. In clinical trials, of course, social media is important. So we recommend all sites, hey, have a Facebook page, have an Instagram page, even have a TikTok. I know one of my PIs has a TikTok. He has like 12,000 followers on TikTok.
No kidding! Wow, that's I haven't heard people using TikTok, but
I'll send you his thing.
It's a newer platform, and I think that's a great idea because it's it kind of exposes the world of research to people at large.
It's a new demo, and I use TikTok too. It's a new demo, but here's my point. All right, we're encouraging sites to do all this stuff, myself included. I'm doing it. Technically, if you were to ask Darshan Kulkarni, who's my go-to lawyer for this stuff, my site, okay, Yuma Clinical Trial doesn't have a Facebook page. I'll make one. A patient finds me on Yuma Clinical Trials and starts messaging me their side effects or their medical history.
Yeah.
Technically, that's a HIPAA violation. I think if I were to ask an attorney, if I asked 10 attorneys, I bet you at least 3 of them would say yes, if not more.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, and like you said, I'm not a HIPAA expert. And it also depends on whether they're doing it before they enroll as a patient or after. I think there's a difference, especially if the patient is providing the information, you can't really control what they message you with. So I think there's probably some nuance to it, but to your point, I think after they become a patient, it's important to kind of move them over to a more secure medium.
Yes.
But you bring up a really good point that, there's so many things out there. It's like, it's impossible for a site to be on top of it all. You want to be on Instagram, you want to have a great website, you want to have a great landing page for your trial. You want to be able to communicate with potential subjects in any way possible, but it's just impossible to stay on top of it all. And so, you have to have some way to kind of have a central hub to manage all of that, which, there are tools out there that allow you to do that. And especially with something like with research, where a patient can be worth 4 or 5 figures or more, you have to get every last patient that comes in. If you remember our story from last year when we spoke, I reached out to maybe 6 sites as a mystery shopper, and majority of them never called me back, and that was a mislead for them. So if not trying to push what we're doing, but that's one of the things that we are focusing on, to kind of have a centralized hub where even if somebody comes to your site, just have, you've seen the pop-up chat bubble, just having that, you could potentially bring in some more patients, and that's part of the software.
Right. No, that's amazing. I'll definitely be blogging about it as it happens. So yeah, I think we brought up enough good, talking points here. We don't have all the answers.
Sure.
As you can tell,
it's a work in progress.
Yeah, and the entire industry operates in the gray area. I mean, you want to go macro, and maybe piss some people off. So the vaccine, okay, somebody brought me this thought, and we actually both know this guy. You brought him up earlier. Every study, if you look, has exclusionary criteria for experimental therapies. The vaccine, I know it's emergency use authorized, but it's still an experimental product. But none of the protocols say, with the exception of COVID-19 vaccine.
Interesting.
So technically, the entire industry is in the gray area right now. Forget about HIPAA and all this stuff. Just that alone. Now, I know I get some people commenting saying, well, EUA is different. Well, show me where it's different, because I don't see that in GCP or in the protocols. Like emergency use is not approval. It's approved. It's authorized for emergency use, but it's not approved. It's a different story
Sure.
when the vaccine's approved. So I think the way sites are handling it now is just CONMEDs, and I'm not against this. I'm just bringing up a point. Like everything you do potentially as a site is
Sure.
in the gray area,
True.
and if you ask enough attorneys, some of them are going to tell you this is violation. That's just their job.
Yeah, it's tough because the more regulations there are, the more complex it becomes. But on the other end, you're dealing with patients' lives, you're dealing with health, and so it's a fine balance, and some tend to be on one side, and others are on the other side. But it's an interesting dynamic to observe and watch.
Oh yeah, what a time to be alive. But you know what? With all this uncertainty is all the opportunities for
Yeah,
people like you, Ronek, to come in, for people watching in the comments, for people listening on the podcast. Think about all these problems. Everything's a pain point for a site.
sure.
And the site is like Rome, all roads lead to Rome.
Hmm.
So all ideas in this space lead to the sites. I mean, that's
Yes.
where it's at.
Yeah,
That's
that's
where it's at.
where the magic happens, right? It's an incredible time to be in research. It's an incredible time with all the things going on with tech and just the world at large. It's for the right person. There's just so many opportunities. I would advise anyone to jump in and just explore. There's so much out there.
So for those, we're gonna wrap up. But for those wanting to follow Ronek, I'm going to get his LinkedIn profile. I'm gonna put it in the chat so you guys can see it. You can, if you're actually watching live, you can click on it from wherever you're at. And if you're watching it on the replay, you just gotta type this in on your browser. And Ronek's definitely someone you want to get to know. So, anything else, Ronek, that we missed, or
No,
we'll
that's
save it
great.
for next time?
Yeah, thanks for coming in or having me on.
Thank you, Ronek. And let's get one more comment. So let's give this a few more seconds for people to. All right, pause it right now. That's Ronek's LinkedIn. It'll be in the show notes too. And then last one. Alicia says, coming from a diagnostic lab perspective, EUA meant that certain parts of the diagnostic procedure did not need to be completed, adhered to. Yeah, but that's you just adding more gray area because it still doesn't answer the question. It's experimental or not. Who wants to answer that? I mean, who? I would say yes, it's still technically experimental. So anyways, thank you, Mia from Creo. And thank you, Ronek. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Interesting stuff. Drop your comments and let us know what you think. If you got nothing else to drop a couple of robots in there so we can shatter the algorithms. And I appreciate it, Ronek. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Dan.